running the meeting?
Cody Fenton?
Cody, can you do it? Okay, thank you.
All right, we ready? All right, we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. Can we get a roll call, please?
LeBlanc,
Here.
Fenton,
Here.
Denham,
Here.
Yancey,
Here.
Meenan, McConnell, Stepp,
Here.
Milton. Committee member Fenton, we have a quorum.
Thank you. We'll now move on to the regular agenda, and we'll turn it over to Ben.
So, we got the $50,000 and over.
Do we,
Pull that one up.
well, do we have, if we have a quorum, can we do the approval of the minutes?
Yeah. Can we do, okay. So you want to do a roll call? I mean, a vote?
All right,
So moved.
Second.
This is a motion to approve the Finance Committee minutes for the March 2nd, 2023 regular meeting. So we have a first and a second. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Now we'll move on to acknowledgement of disbursements, 50,000 and over.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion on that? Any questions? We don't actually vote on that, do we, Ben?
Oh,
I think we'll just.
You don't vote on it?
I think we'll just
Tracy?
acknowledge it.
that's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
You just acknowledge it, okay.
All right.
Now
Now,
pull
financial
PowerPoint.
questions and answers presented by Ben.
So, anytime we try to collect information that goes out to the public that is not originating from in-house, just to make sure the public has good information or accurate information. So what we did is kind of collect some of that information that went out or that has been out in the public, and just wanted to be able to provide some data or some answers to some of those questions that not just this committee, but the public may have about some of that information. And that's really what this is. It's a Q&A, set up as a Q&A. We'll do these periodically, just depending on what else out there. So this committee, or really any other board member, has questions that they'd like to put out there and get clarified, because your constituents may have questions. We did that this week with Branson Hill CID. So that's really not a huge issue for us. One of the questions we had was surrounding the convention center garage income, and this is a complex issue, right? Because the city owns the convention center, city owns the garage, and there's a reporting mechanism that goes between ASM Global, the operator of the garage, and the city. Well, they submit information to us on a regular basis. To those two finance members right back there, all the information comes through us. And that includes the garage income. So that information comes in, it gets deposited into what the agreement calls a parking garage operating account. But as far as the reporting is concerned, that garage income is also put into our financial statements and comes through this committee on a monthly basis. With respect to that, what I've got, the garage incomes, revenues prepaid by customers at the Hilton, and this is like, when I come in and I prepay by $15 or whatever, it goes to the Hilton. They're the ones that collect this. They're kept by the Hilton. Convention center personnel provide that monthly report to us. The information you guys see, or at least is in your packet, this is December's. The numbers really are irrelevant. It's just the fact that it's there. You can see 3 lines down at the bottom where it says parking revenue. That's where that number's at. So in December, year-to-date, December 31st of 22, there's 317,000 there. Now, we can also ask Sam over at the convention center for a detailed breakdown whenever anybody needs that. But that information's out in the public. I believe it's also put on our website, so it's available as well. Question 2 are how the repairs and upkeep funded. The city, if the public or people don't follow our budget process, we typically budget anywhere from $400,000 to $500,000. And it goes over to the convention center for repairs and upkeep. That includes the garage, includes the walkway between the garage and the convention center. They've done a ton of updates over there. And then for that matter, Sam comes back on a periodic basis throughout the year just to kind of update us on what the convention center has done. And I feel like from a finance point of view, he's got a lot of non-financial and financial information in that presentation. And he provides a lot of that information out there. But the funding comes from operations at the convention center as well as the subsidy that goes in from us. Question 3, what's the status of the tax increment financing bonds? And that's related to Branson Landing. The graph I've got up here at the top shows the revenues and expenses, both history and then our forecast into the future. You can see the revenue, the expenses is that orange little line that jumped up above in 2020. It's really a product of the expenses going down, or the revenues going down because of COVID hit and nobody's traveling. So that was the only year that we've had a hiccup. But even then, we've been able to accumulate enough of a cash reserve to fly right back by that process. So payments are being made ahead of schedule. We're right now accumulating money for what would call a balloon payment at the end, which is 2027. We're accumulating that money right now to make that balloon payment. Anytime we can prepay any of those bonds, we're prepaying them.
What's the balloon payment amount?
I think it's around, 10 million? Yeah, for Branson Landing, yeah, it's 10 million. Total collections in 22, just for an example, 12.6 million. Debt payments going out is 9.2. So that difference is what we're capturing. And the debt, on top of the debt payments that are being made, that difference is what's being captured and put in the reserves. And the city, for that matter, continues to maintain its bond credit rating. I know there's folks out there, the information that was out there had these bonds being delinquent. And these bonds are not delinquent. The payments are being made through the trustee. We get reports from the trustee on a monthly basis. It goes into our office to review and opine on, and we make sure they're accurate with the revenues we've got coming in. So they're ahead of schedule on those. And for that matter, if they were delinquent in this case, it would be an issue with their credit rating, whether it would decrease or, it wouldn't increase, but whether it would decrease their credit rating is a longer story to tell, but it would definitely have a conversation with our credit rating agency. And we haven't had that because it's not an issue. And for that matter, revenue that we get are earmarked only for that TIF and can be only used for that TIF. It can't be used for any other purpose. When does the TIF end is the next question. The word end isn't in there. The TIF ends, we have TIFs in Branson that expire in 26, 7, 29, and 30. Branson Landing expires in 26. The bonds, actually, there's one tranche of bonds that will term in 2034. And I'll get to that math here in a minute. But one of the other questions that was asked is surrounding the management of the convention center and the contract. The current manager obviously is ASM Global, and Sam's here every quarter to talk about what the convention center is doing. Well, in the original contract and the updated one, it allowed for incremental extensions. And this board is able to make those incremental extensions based on satisfaction of the management and what's going on. And if anybody's ever heard Sam talk in the last year, you can understand why we would continue using ASM Global. So this body's got an ability to extend that contract at 2 to 3 years at a time.
Yeah, and specific to that, I'd just like to add that it wasn't so much just the management, but even their performance.
Exactly.
And, based on that and not knowing how convention centers work, but they tend to be a loss leader, well,
Yep.
this company is managing it in a sense that it actually this year made a profit, and, which is, from what Sam says, is almost unheard of.
Absolutely.
And so, and I think that's one of the reasons we're looking at expansion, is because if it's an asset that could bring that tax base up for the city, then certainly we want to look at investing money in that ground, I mean, and,
Absolutely.
wow, I think it's amazing.
I mean, it's, the performance has been such that we've got a feasibility RFQ out on the street right now to actually look at the feasibility of that expansion. We would never do that with anything that would be a negative outcome.
Sure.
Right? And they're pulling folks in from a national stage.
Yeah.
And I stayed there all year last year, and not all year, but when I was down, that sounds like I was here daily. But when I come down, I stay there, and I can tell you how many times I've saw that convention was full. I mean, just having to weave through there to go to my room is fantastic.
Ben, on the landing TIF, remind me, is that the one, it's 100%
Yeah,
tax abatement?
Super TIF.
yeah,
So basically, any sales tax collected down there goes
toward that, right.
Gotcha. So once that's paid off in 2026,
That's a good, yeah, so this is where I want to get to that question. So that's a great lead-in. Financial status of the city and how to learn more. This question was really around what you're alluding to. So the TIF ends in 26. One of the tranches of bonds ends in 2034. And I mentioned a little bit ago that we're building up surplus beyond the debt service payments. So right now, 9.2 is being plugged into debt service. Well, anything above that, in this case it was 3 million, anything above that is stored as a surplus, or when we're able to prepay that debt down. That will continue through 2026. And at the end of 2026, we'll have, I want to say, around 12 to 19 million in principal outstanding. That's after we net out all the surplus and use it for whatever's there. So that allows, and then from there, any outstanding bonds that we would have, we will be able to capture those with any kind of tourism tax. So we've got fund reserves set up in general fund and tourism fund right now. We've got around 25 million in the tourism fund. When we look at those type of issues, we look at it on a long-term basis. So we put together a 5-year forecast on the operating funds within the city. Well, all the funds really, but the operating funds are really the most important. Tourism fund is one of those. So we put together a 5-year forecast for that tourism fund to make sure we have cash set aside to be able to take out the rest of those bonds.
I thought the tourism fund could not be used for paying off debt. Is that, I thought it was for capital
Currently-
projects, but,
Right,
so infrastructure, okay.
yeah, come on up, yeah.
That would be so much better. Okay, we had debt until last year in the tourism account, and so far the main debt we've had in tourism has been mainly for water and sewer as they put the infrastructure in. I don't know, I don't have a breakdown on how much of the landing is infrastructure and how much is not, but if it is infrastructure, we can.
Peel it out, use.
But you
tourism
will
fund.
check on, because
Absolutely.
it was my understanding that
Absolutely.
that was not how those
Yeah,
dollars could be used.
my point is really when we look at those operating funds, we've got between 2023 and 2026 to set aside that money, which we're doing now, set aside that money to pay those bonds off immediately. So the TIF ends in 26. My intent is take everything from the surplus within that TIF, add money to it, and pay all of it off. So they'll all terminate. The bonds won't expire in 34. They'll actually expire when the TIF expires. Right now, we're building money up in several funds, but one of them is the general fund. The other one's tourism fund. To the extent we can use it, we're going to use it. And it's got plenty of money in it. So we've got cash set aside now. If something happened now, we'd use it. But as far as a plan is considered into the future, we'll have the bonds paid off by that 2026 mark. So it's building cash up in the fund now. It's more than taking care of their current bond payments. Bond payments are made on time. This is in no delinquent status whatsoever. we've got time now to plan for the future.
So once that's paid off, that 9.2 million roughly that's being paid, is that just, once that's done, is that now just additional revenue to the city for?
Absolutely.
for
The
any
TIF
use?
ends, the TIF will end at the termination of the TIF time or when the bonds are paid off.
Sure.
And then there's no restriction on how
No, that,
those,
everything unwinds and all the revenue then comes into the city or back to the taxpayers that it was reallocated for. Yeah.
Kind of relates to what we were talking about with Branson Hills the other night, too.
Exactly.
And those are in those same windows of time.
And they are.
So
That's
by
right,
the
they are.
late, in the next 5-6 years,
We'll have a lot of
we'll
revenue
have a
coming
lot of
back on.
debt
Yeah.
coming off the books, so revenue.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. And that's the other point, is the revenue coming off, point of accumulation, is the revenue coming off and back into the city is not a small amount. So that's money that could be set aside if we needed to use it in '27 to pay down bond, we'll use it in '27 to pay down bonds. I mean, you can see the whole, of all the districts and all the revenue coming in, there's $12 million. And that, the landing is a big attraction. It does a lot of business down there. So when that TIF expires, that revenue comes in. That revenue comes in with sales tax, so it's general sales tax coming in. We'll see that in the general fund and other places. The most important point here is the long-term forecast drives the decisions on that. So anytime we look at CIP, or anytime we look at increasing operations within the city, we set aside that fund balance. Right now it's 30% of expenses. We set aside that fund balance, knowing what our obligations are in the future to pay those down. You guys did this here, a couple of years ago in paying off COPs. Same deal. You paid off COPs ahead of time. So that really is what drives that information. What else? I think that might, the information is obviously available on the Board of Aldermen and Finance Committees, and for that matter, it's out on our website as well. And they could call Hillary or Finance for any information anybody wants on any of those TIFs for that matter. We will go through this year in our budget process in more depth, so we can share more information about what the status of these TIFs are, what the debt service payments look like, what the revenues coming in look like. That way we've got it all out there. And we didn't do that last year, but this year my intent is to do that in detail. That way we've got it out there for the public. Just some other facts, and this relates to the prior question. We've already talked about the 2026 expiration. Debt, principal outstanding at that point will be $12 million, just over $12 million. Right now, at 12/31/26, there'll be $41 and change outstanding with a surplus that's expected at $29 million, and that's at a 1% growth for 23, 4, 5, and 6. And we've been clipping along a lot higher than 1%. So at a conservative basis, we'll have 29 million. At a 3, 4%, that number is going to be in the $30 million range. So it's going to be a lot smaller. I say that's barring any kind of COVID event or any kind of catastrophic.
Are there any concerns? I know there's some legislation up in Jeff City around collection of sales tax, elimination of sales tax, and different things. Is there any concerns around that as we look forward to, our budgeting process?
Yeah.
And, again, with the current economy, not sure that we can say
Yeah,
we're going to
absolutely.
be able to do what we've done.
Absolutely.
Been very blessed to have done in the last couple of
Right.
years, but
Right.
looking into all of those areas, I mean, that could have a significant impact on our
Yeah.
revenues going forward.
Absolutely, and that's a great point, because MEDFA, the Missouri Economic Development Association, is lobbying against that bill heavily for this purpose. And I know Baker Tilly represents, as a municipal advisor, several cities that have very large TIFs in them, like Branson. So we collect that information, and we supply that information in gross to those lobbyists that can then take that and use it for actual data, how that would impact. So if it was groceries that they eliminate and there's a grocery store in a TIF, then that potentially turns that TIF upside down, right? Because it's a revenue generator. It was intended to be a revenue generator when we set up the TIF. Yeah, so that's a good point. One of the, just some additional facts on the TIF revenue. In Branson Landing, the 2005 was a $18.5 million issue. Interest rates, the coupon rates were anywhere from 5.25% to 5.5%. There's a special obligation of 2005A also issued with $80 million, and again, it shows the interest rates there. In 2022 or 2012, there's a $33 million issue. These were the original year's amounts and interest rate on those primary bonds. What we've got outstanding right now on that TIF is a 2015A 20-year. Last payment I mentioned was 2034. When 2015 was issued, it refunded a portion of a couple other bonds. At the time, the present value savings that your financial advisor had calculated was around $7.4 million. The last payment was 34. The original bonds, one of the bonds had an expiration of 2035, so it actually, that refunding shortened it up a little bit, and the coupon rates came down. Where they were high, they came down, and that's what provided that savings at the time. Who made the decisions to refinance these bonds that extended past the TIF period is one of the questions. The original bonds they were always past the TIF period. And what the refunding did was just bring the interest rates down and help shave a year off of that number. So those bonds had always been, as part of those bonds were already well past that time. That's the answers to the questions they had been posed to us. And like I said, as we move forward, this is a great avenue to get information out there. So if you guys see it as a finance committee, you see additional information, get it to us, and we'll put it in a Q&A form, and we'll put the information out there.
Ben, can you just clarify on that last slide with where it says last payment due in 2034, and then does that all tie back to the outstanding of 41 million?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if we went that full time,
If we went that full part.
it could go to 2034, but right now we're on track to pay it off when the TIF expires.
Yes.
Okay.
That
Can
is
I ask
definitely the goal.
one more question? Back up to the convention center, and, no one is happier than me that they actually had black ink instead
Yeah,
of red
right.
ink. But that is in addition to, we supplement them in marketing and some
Absolutely.
capital expenditures and different things. So that is on top of what the city has put into that, correct?
Right.
I mean, if
Right.
we didn't put that money in there, that would have been a different picture,
Right.
correct? So
That's correct.
that's
Yeah.
what we've been doing.
Right. Injecting that
Every year.
information. Yeah,
So,
that's right.
and every year, even though we've put those dollars in, they've still
Yeah.
had the red number at the
Right,
end. So
right.
this year is, or last year was really definitely a huge improvement in that
Huge
area.
improvement,
But I don't want to lose the sight of the fact that we still, so that people understand, yes, we are still obligated to
Absolutely.
supplement them in certain areas, correct?
And that is assumed to be part of the budget every year.
Yeah.
The way we calculate it and the way it's.
I just don't want
yeah.
people coming back and saying when it's budgeting time, why are you budgeting money if they made money last year? So I just want
Yeah,
that.
that's a great point, because the way Sam measures his performance is a legitimate way. He's not making these numbers up or the structure.
Right.
So the way he measures it is truly legitimate, but the way the government measures it is completely separate.
Of course
the way
it
we
is.
measure it.
Of course it is.
Yeah, right.
And I would say that Sam's very, upfront about saying that the city does supplement that, and that marketing money is used to close that arbitrage, because he can now offer things that other communities were able to offer, that if he
Absolutely.
didn't have that marketing money, he wouldn't be able to get those events to come here.
Right.
So he's very transparent that that's
Yeah.
exactly, that it's that collaboration between the city and with AMS that is really
Yeah.
working well. And, again, that just speaks to the reason why this board was so enthusiastically ready to just yes, let's go renew this contract and move forward, because, we see that collaboration working, and they're on top of it, so.
I would, this might be unfair, I don't believe it is, but up in Kansas City, there's a metropolitan city that's a very affluent community that is exactly like Branson in the ownership of their convention center and the hotels ran by a flag, right? This community puts $2 to $3 million into their convention center as a subsidy every single year. And they do that because of an obligation, obviously they have. But that's what I want to contrast between what we put in is $500,000.
Right.
That's a huge difference. And a lot of it's because of the way it's ran and the attraction Branson has to those national level conferences.
We've all had, gone to events there, and,
Yeah.
and that's just the ones that we have locally. But,
Right.
I'm sure the ones, like the quilters, like
Yes,
14,000.
actually, yeah.
Wow, like I didn't
Yeah.
even know that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's almost like having 14,000 like techies in town. I don't know what quilters, it's
You
interesting.
quilting techies, yeah.
Yeah, quilting.
Their age group probably went up. Yeah, but it's kind of exciting what's going on down there. So that's why the information we got now.
I have a question, and it's kind of off of all this, but this is a question that I've been asked by constituents, and it goes back to like in the beginning of 2023, with the staffing study that we did, we were able to kind of adjust all of those, basically the pay for our employees within the city. And, a lot of people are coming to me going like, hey, like, so what's going to happen like in 5 years? Like, right now we have money in reserve, but in 5 years, maybe that money's not going to be there. Can you kind of outline, give us like a 30,000, like, how did that, like that staffing study and the decision to do that was based on not just what's the snapshot of today, but it was in that 5-year forecast
Right.
that you guys had done? Could you kind of?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Anytime we put a budget together, our issue isn't the current year, it's 5 years out. We break that budget down into 2 buckets, right? Operations and capital. Capital you can plug in or you can unplug depending on the economy, right? Operations is something that's a lot harder to do. So you've got to look long-term at what your decisions are today. When we came on board, we met with HR. We knew they had positions that they wanted to look at, including in the budget. Our approach was, let's take all of them, plug them in as of January 1st. What that is a stress test, right, to that 5-year outlook. And because of the recent years' growth in the economy, which increased sales taxes, increased the new revenue we come in as far as property tax, there's other revenues that have increased. Franchise fees for the utilities that are paid in, all that lifted the revenue structure. Then we took a look at that and said, well, how much of that we expect to continue into the future, right? So sales tax is one that's obviously volatile. And here, a couple of years ago, we saw that tank big time. So what we did was take that growth and expand it out at a very nominal rate, 1%, still with those 42 people in it, 44 people in it, as of January 1st, knowing full well we're not going to do that. And look at what that outlook is. So before we ever approached the board about plugging those positions in formally, we were able to measure that out and see what our goal was for 2025, by 2026 and 7. We would hit our reserves, fund reserves, at the end of that year, at the end of that 5-year window, plugging those positions in. So then it become a matter of, okay, which ones are higher priority to plug in? The firefighters, the police officers, there's certain positions that need to be here like now and get ready for the future. So HR obviously is in full tilt getting those positions in. And they are not all in the general fund. They're spread out amongst the different funds. General fund's the biggest operating fund we have. Next to that then is going to be water and sewer. And we've got, and then we've got the public safety fund too that's got firefighters and police in it, obviously. So we've got to do a 5-year forecast on all of those. So affordability for me is, can you afford it in year 5 if you plug it in year 1? We'll start our budget discussions this year by updating that information with all the new stuff that we've got going on now, and any of the changes that we made in 22, we'll plug all that in. Well, we've already plugged it in, but we'll bring that whole forecast back to show you what that impact was. And that way we can make tweaks where we need to, or expectations into the future. I know right now the director's got their plate full with the capital going out right now. We plugged new positions in. My estimation of this budget is not going to look like it was last year, because they're going to still be really, really busy keeping that capital going. So it's, But that's how we put it together. We look at it long-term before we ever do anything.
And that was still keeping our not just our minimum
30%.
reserve, but our conservative reserve, right?
Yes, that's right, right. Typically, we see in year 5, it dip down below that conservative reserve. Well, typically, in year 5, we see it go negative. In this case, it was still positive, moving out that 5 years. But we continue to measure that on a quarterly basis just to see what the revenues are. If we'll look at the revenues, and if the sustainable revenue picture looks current, then we won't change it. Right now, the sales tax, and we'll get to this in a minute, but the sales tax plugged in at 1% increase. Last year was what, 8? Tourism, and we'll get to that here in a minute. I want to get on a soapbox right now, but I'll stop.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. You want to move over to the dashboard? And we'll run through that. And this dashboard matters. This is the next agenda item for that matter. The monthly dashboard. And I go through this every month that we have data for you, and this is out there every month on our website. But this actually directly impacts our 5-year forecast, right? When we have sales tax plugged in at 1% for 23. In quarter 2, we're still looking at what we did last year, and if we expect it to end that way, at an 8% increase over instead of a 1%, we're going to bring that like we did last year. We're going to bring that back to you, saying here's the gap that we're going to have, the surplus we're going to have. And if we can, we're going to plug that into the budget discussion. So the Finance Committee and the board can actually look at it as part of our capital plan. I brought to you guys last month the 3.75 that we'd sweep off and still maintain a fund balance. We're doing that. We're doing that and putting it in capital. And that's going to pay dividends for us. So the 1% sales tax, this is all sales tax coming into the city in the general fund. That includes TIFs that would actually be deposited. So right now, March, we're 9% above March before that. The February, we were 10% above the prior month and 13% cumulative prior to the first year on sales tax. So sales tax is chugging right along. At this point, 3 months doesn't give you much of a trend, right? You can see the peak there in August, September, but we'll know a lot more about how the sustainable growth is going here in the next 2 months. Can you scroll down to keep going to the unrestricted? So the unrestricted right there is the one we have in the general fund that's unrestricted and used for general operations. This one pulls out the TIFs and CID, any kind of other revenues that come in that we have to allocate it out for other purposes. February 23 there, 16% above 22. Budgetarily, we are on point, if not way ahead, for that matter. Tourism fund, we're being a lot more careful on, and I'm glad we are. Through February, we're 2% above the same period as 22. And remember, 2% above the prior period is still way above 2023 or 2019. I think it's around 46% above 2019. That's 2% above a very high growth number. So sustainability here is a great thing because of the new tourism money coming in. And we're looking at a sustainable. In this case, we plugged 5% decrease in there, anticipating inflation having an impact in the travel numbers. We'll see what happens. I think that might actually be overly conservative, but we're in a good position making decisions on a 5% decrease rather than a 5% increase. That's one we can change in a minute whenever we go through our budget process. We also bring back, and it's out there on the internet, this report out there is on amusements, the theaters, and the categories, just typical categories that are out there. And this is really leading indicators on how our sales tax is going to perform. And we provide narrative down there, but the one I do want to point out, there's a couple of them I want to point out, is on the nightly rentals, we're 22% above last year, currently through February. We're 213% above 2019. Nightly rentals are growing leaps and bounds. We've got properties, here in a minute, I'll show you, we've got properties coming in and being built exclusively for nightly rentals. There's a lot of people coming in to stay in Branson, and that's the equivalent of putting all these hotels in place. But these investments coming in mean that the investors know that there's still people that are wanting to come in and stay there. Otherwise, they wouldn't put these millions of dollars into the economy. So that's a big one coming in.
And those are just the nightly rentals that are reporting to us. They're,
Exactly, that's a
because
great
I know
point.
there's been a lot of discussion on
Absolutely.
us not being able to capture
Yep.
all the collection
Yeah,
because some are not licensed as a
Absolutely.
nightly rental and different
Absolutely.
things, so.
yeah, and we've taken a stab at that. I know that's one of the mayor's big rocks he talked about last year, is that very thing that you're bringing up. In knowing that there's nightly rentals out there, and anybody that does business within the city's got to have a business license. Didn't matter who you are, you got to have a business license. The theory behind that is what you just said, is there may be nightly rentals coming in that are nightly rentals that don't, one, have a business license, and two, not paying tourism tax or sales tax. Don't know that that's true, we just don't know, right? So we broke this issue really down into two. The one we're going to attack right away. We've got licensing staff on the first phase looking at the answer to that question. Everything we've got now, and the compliance and regulations we have now in collecting that tax, what is the best way to find that out, what that gap is? And they're actually talking to other communities, Wisconsin Dells and a couple other than the ones they mentioned, Gulfport, in seeing what they do to capture that difference, because everybody's in the same boat when it comes to nightly rentals. Across the U.S., nightly rentals are
Well,
growing.
even just from city to county.
Yeah.
It's,
Huge.
yeah.
Yeah, and Branson's a great, it's an attractive economy, and yeah.
Can you look at water and sewer users?
Yeah, we'll look at it all. Any kind of license, we can bounce that license agreement or that business licensed against any of the data we've got in our system. Yeah.
Surely they're using.
Oh, yeah, no,
Water and
I'm
sewer.
with you. I'm with you. We've got staff back in Kansas City that does that review fairly quick for other communities. And now it's just a matter of downloading that data and putting it into his filter and see what he comes up with. And it's not hard to do. The rest of it, I'll let the reader go through it, but I just wanted to make sure I pointed out the nightly rentals, and they're growing. Water utility charges and the sewer utility charges, you can see that the bigger portion of those is through the summer and early fall, that those revenues come in. Usually January, February, and December are some of the smaller collection months. And that'll be important here in a minute when I show you the rest. And property taxes, static, if you will. Cumulative, this is the 1% sales tax cumulative. And this graphic just kind of shows you, and it's somewhat hard to see only because the gap is a 2% gap over last year. It kind of shows you what that orange line you can barely make out above that black line is the 2023 number. The fact that you can see it above all the other lines is a positive thing. But you can notice that this one and the next one, the orange line and the current lines are running together. So the gap is getting narrower. We're seeing a true growth pattern. It's like 2 to 3% on tourism tax. Sales tax is obviously above that, but we're seeing that normal, what we expect to see as a growth pattern. But it's a growth pattern on a high number, which is not a bad thing. General fund, we're at 17% through the year. Got an $800,000 surplus. I mean, again, it's through February, right? So there's still a lot of year to go. The water and sewer is the same thing, and like I said, the expenses more than the revenues at this point is not unusual because our bigger collection months are coming up. So that gap will change and reverse. We want to pause on this one. And so this is the typical, counts that we have on sales tax and tourism tax. The line that it doesn't show up yet just because there's not another month to put in there, But what we see is the tourism tax and the sales tax tracking the same trend here. This next chunk is brand new, and I want to continue to put this information in it, but I want to make sure I get what would be important for you guys to look at. So this is the permit construction value I got from Mark's staff over in planning. Construction value for January and February together, both of them together for 22 versus 23. In 22, those 2 months were 9.6 million. In 23, that's doubled, almost doubled, 16.2 million. The bigger chunks is new commercial and existing, and then I show you arrows of what those look like, what the bigger chunks of those new construction and the existing construction, the existing commercial looks like. And so you see the top three, Social Birdie, the Rocky Top, Branson, and Majestic, making up $7 million of that $8 million that's coming in. And then on the existing value, you see that there's a big chunk in the deck repairs in two big buildings that are out on Champaign. And then one that's out there in 395 Meadow Ridge. All told, in 2023, those 2 months alone were 124 permits that are coming through their office. That's just 2 months. There's a lot more year to go through, but I just wanted to make sure that this was in front of the public as well, because the economy in Branson is growing, and this is an indicator right here.
Thank you so much, Ben, for showing this portion on the slide. I would love to continue to see this because it just really shows how well we are doing here. Thanks.
And if there's big gaps, if we have one of the other ones that like the new residential, if it was at 200,000 this year, 700,000, we'll do the same thing. We'll call that out and say, here's what that difference is. So I think it's important for the public to know what's going on. And now that Mark's here, I'm going to talk to him about, is this what he's seen in the past, get his comments about, what else would be relevant for something like this report. Because I know how much a researcher you are. I'm kind of the same flavor. Cash balances, general fund continues to grow. The other end of that spectrum is water and sewer continuing to grow in cash balance, and that'll pay off for us. You can see on the general fund portion at the end of February is just south of 14 million in actual cash balances. Public safety, there on the bottom left, the police public safety is almost identical to last year, and that includes the acquisition of the police department building. That includes that taken out of 23 or 22. That stayed high. And that just shows you the sales tax coming in. And then in 23, you'll recall that we budgeted for the fund, for both funds, the repayment of that growth the general fund enjoyed, making sure that came over to public safety as well. So that's going to happen in 23. Fire public safety, this is fire public safety's operating fund. So you'll see the decrease in that little aqua line. The reason that happened is we pushed over the other aqua line at the very end of the chart. That actually came from operations, and that's around $3 million we set aside for not just their vehicles, but also money set aside for the fire station for. And at this point, we have a plan to pay cash for that entire project. And that was accumulated out of several years of budget before we got here. It's just going to end with a very positive note in the fact that we can afford that building.
Ben, I see on the cash balance, there's one that's in the negative, but I assume that's the same thing. That was money, I think it's capital projects fund.
Yeah, that's just a transfer that takes care of those. Yeah, it's period. It's just a timing issue. Yeah. The tourism fund I pointed at, 27 million there on the bottom right in February 23. We've got a bunch of projects in tourism. We're going to have a fairly high balance until those projects come through. I think our forecast had a $16 million number. As if all projects at the end of 23 were finished and paid for. We know that's not going to happen. So we're going to continue to have a fairly high, sizable balance. That's why the forecast we budget based on forecast, not current cash account, for that very reason. Is that our last page? Yeah, so So that's our last page there. So what I want to do is continue to bring back to you information on permits and new business. That the one thing I haven't put in here is any new licenses coming in, and that was a statistic that we were able to get to Kathy before or after this actually got published. So that's our new ad that we're going to add next month is the new licenses coming in. I think that'd be interesting to see too, not just the number, but who they are, what the licenses look like. And we've got the information. It's just a matter of putting it out there. Just want it to be relevant. That's what I have for our financial overview. Within your packet is going to be, you already got the expenses, yeah. So that's what I have for you today.
Any additional comments, questions, concerns? Well, Ben, thank you. Looks like heading on the right track here, so we appreciate
Absolutely.
you sharing this information, taking the time to walk us through it. Anybody have any reports? Anything they want to report on, Kathy?
No, thank you. I did just fine the other night, so thank you.
Yeah, I think you covered us for a couple months.
I think I did. Thank you.
All right, well, I guess I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign?